assistant to support Bill and his younger brother and sister. Early on, she instilled in them the sense of hard work, perseverance, and lessons that Bill certainly took to heart. Bill studied hard, graduated near the top of his class, and was accepted to the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he graduated in 1989. He went on to serve with great honor in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. After the military, Bill attended ASU Law School, where he graduated with honors. He immediately went to work for Maricopa County Attorney's Office, where he earned a reputation as a tireless prosecutor and victims' rights advocate. In the Auto Theft Bureau, Bill oversaw almost 40% drop in auto thefts. Bill Montgomery was elected to be our Maricopa County Attorney on November 2nd and still holds this office today. And on a side note, he is running for re-election, and I'm saying this isn't on here, but the Chandler Chamber has endorsed him for re-election. So, and especially if it's election day, I want to make sure each of you are out there to vote. So that's my shameless plug.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I do appreciate the Chamber's support, both personally and also support of the office and the work that we do on behalf of the folks of Maricopa County. What I want to do this afternoon, because I want to leave some time for questions. I'm going to share with you what I think you want to hear and some of the points about the office and how we participate in the mission of providing for public safety, but that may not be what you're particularly interested in or want to know about. And there's so much that we do. I want to leave time for that dialogue. First, for an office overview, the geography that we operate in. You know, we have about 4.2 million people in Maricopa County now. And the census update, just from 2010 to 2015, our population grew by 10%. And that's where we get to about 4.2 million. So that makes us the fourth most populous county in the nation. By area, we're right about 9,200 square miles. And so that makes us the 15th largest county in the nation. And we're bigger than some of the states on the East Coast. In terms of the actual structure of the office, we have 1,000 employees now, over 360 prosecutors, which makes us, depending on the day in question, the third largest county-based prosecution agency in the country. Only Cook County with over 800 prosecutors, and Chicago is the center there, or Los Angeles County with over 1,000 prosecutors has more on that basis. And then when it comes to the civil litigation support that we provide, because that's another unique aspect of the office. Around the country, you have some jurisdictions where they elect the criminal prosecutor, and then they appoint the civil attorney for the jurisdiction. But both of those functions are merged within a county attorney here in Arizona. So on the civil side, I have another 45 to 50 civil attorneys who help provide advice, and we represent the county in court. Additionally, within my office, I've got 50 sworn law enforcement officer positions. And just recently, we received the highest accreditation any law enforcement organization can receive in the United States. And so I'm very proud of that. And what basically that tells you is that you have got outstanding men and women who are working on your behalf within the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. And it's because of their work I get to stand in front of you and share some of those accomplishments and what we seek to do day in, day out, and how that can affect business here within Chandler, but certainly business within the East Valley and all across the county. Now, the criminal environment that we deal with is really focused on the impact from drug and human smuggling, as well as some of the stereotypical street crime that we may see around the country, though I'm going to share with you in just a few moments, it is a lot less given the environment we have to deal with. If you look at a map of Maricopa County, our far southwest corner is just 30 miles north of the U.S.-Mexican border. And when you go to the east and the southern part of the Maricopa County border, we pretty much share a corridor with the Tohono O'odham Nation. And the Tohono O'odham Indian Nation straddles the U.S.-Mexican border. And they have a rite of passage to go back and forth across that border. So that means there is no fencing or quote-unquote operational control of that border. It's under the regulation and responsibility of the tribe. And in any work that they do in conjunction with Customs and Border Protection or the Drug Enforcement Administration or any federal agencies along those lines. And so we're developing a good partnership with them at the county and at the state level, and federal agencies are continuing to work with them too, because that corridor then provides a very large avenue in the Tucson sector for human and drug smuggling. In fact, last year, at the end of fiscal year 2015, once again, Arizona was the main thoroughfare for drug smuggling into the United States, primarily through that Tucson sector. And so we've got a difficult environment to deal with there. And now the consequences of that, I mentioned drug and human smuggling, they go in parallel. Currently, Texas and the Border Patrol sectors in Texas are seeing the greatest number of individuals who are being apprehended, trying to cross at unlawful points, or maybe another way to say it is people who are crossing at other than lawful points of entry. We still have that here within Arizona. We're still averaging anywhere around 300 deaths a year in the Sonoran Desert from people trying to cross at a place other than a lawful port of entry. And crime that goes along with that then affects us in the Phoenix metro area. A few years back, right around the height of the number of individuals who were being apprehended at the border, Phoenix was known as the kidnapping capital of the world. Well, to provide more context for that, kidnapping capital of the world outside of Mexico City. We did not have kidnappings of U.S. citizens or those who were here in the country with lawful authority. What it resulted from were coyotes who were smuggling large numbers of human beings up across the border into the Phoenix metro area and then holding them for ransom as they sought to extort their families in Mexico to pay more than what they had originally paid to be brought into the country. And then depending on how you want to count that incident, you either had one mass incident of kidnapping in that home, where you could have 10, 20, 30, 40 people, or you had 10, 20, 30, 40 separate incidents of kidnapping. And so depending upon how you want to characterize that criminal situation, you could have different numbers and a different way of characterizing the criminal environment. I share that with you because now I want to tell you how we're doing overall with crime rates within Maricopa County in the state of Arizona. Currently, we're at a 50-year low in crime. And crime is measured on a per capita basis, so it's the number of criminal offenses per 100,000 living in Arizona. But you've got to go back to 1965 to find a similar number of crimes being committed per 100,000 residents. That's fantastic. And that should be part of the more broad economic development discussion that we're having with businesses and with folks both within Arizona and outside of Arizona for relocation or for job creation or for entrepreneurs wanting to start a business. Our violent crime rate is at a 40-year low. Our homicide rate is at a 50-year low. Now let me preface the next few numbers by saying that if you've lost a loved one, one is too many. And so I'm not minimizing the loss of any family. Having said that though, and trying to understand the broader context, our murder rate is 4.7 murders per 100,000. The national homicide rate is 4.5 murders per 100,000. So even with that environment that I've just shared with you, and drug and human smuggling can include a lot of violence, and it's indiscriminate too when it comes to harming those who may be in the vicinity. In fact, a number of years back, we haven't had this happen in a long time, but a number of years back, we had rival human smuggling gangs involved in a shootout on I-10 near the downtown metro area, where once a bullet leaves a gun, it doesn't care who it hits. So when you've got that kind of criminal environment going on, you have a risk of other crime that goes with it. So having said all that, the fact that we still operate within that environment, the fact that we have such a problem with heroin in our communities now, the fact that the Sinaloa cartel uses Maricopa County as its distribution hub for its heroin market within the United States, we're doing phenomenal. But I want to present you with a balanced understanding there of crime, because there are times where I'll take to a podium and I'll talk about the impact of heroin on our community and the drug trafficking that we have to deal with. And yes, we do need to deal with that because there's also crime related to it. And I'll share some anecdotes about that too and how we're trying to address it, because it does impact small businesses as well as chain retail stores. But I say that and I talk about the impact of heroin as part of a broader strategy and a broader commitment from me as your county attorney and the people who work within the office that we are never going to accept today's crime rate as the lowest it will ever get. No matter how low that crime rate goes, we're always going to want to work with community, business, civic leaders and our partners in public safety to continue to drive that down. The more victims we can eliminate, the more instances in which we can help businesses avoid becoming victimized by crime, the better it inures to the benefit of everybody else. We all pay for the cost of crime. Okay. When we talk about then fraud, we have a very specific bureau within the office. It actually started about 12 years ago as a computer crimes bureau and then grew into the Fraud and Identity Theft Enforcement Unit. As acronyms go, it conveniently comes out the Fight Bureau. But that's not because everybody within that bureau likes to argue. It was a joke. It's okay. It's okay to laugh. So within the Fight Bureau now, they have a responsibility for fraud cases that involve white-collar fraud, as well as regular frauds against businesses and individuals. In order to help businesses in that regard, we also have a bad check program where we provide essentially the collection services for you, bringing the checks to our office, registering with the program, and then we will make contact with the person who wrote the check. Now, the leverage that we have is that if they just got into a bad strait and they want to make good on that check, we'll help set up a payment program. They'll pay fines and fees associated with it, and then the program becomes self-funding. Now, it's not 100% self-funding. There still are general fund dollars that are required to help keep it going, but that service is available for folks, and it allows someone who otherwise would face a criminal prosecution to help make the business whole at no cost to the business, and then with them having the opportunity to go through programs and services and pay back that restitution and come out the other end without any worse for the wear, but having experienced the need to be responsible, and again, as I mentioned, to make that business whole. We also provide that service for individuals, but the overwhelming majority of customers that we have in the program are businesses. And by way of a quick unscientific survey, how many business owners still accept checks as a form of payment? Okay, so still enough to make that service valuable if you want to accept it, continue to accept checks, and you don't want to run into the cost of having to hire a collection agency for you and then lose money on the front end and the back end when they get done collecting that. The other aspect of fraud that I want to mention too that we're seeing now, we used to at one point in time, and I want to talk about identity theft, be the #1 state in the country for identity theft. And it was primarily driven by employment-related fraud. Now, I mentioned earlier some of the issues that we had with human smuggling and kidnapping within the Phoenix metro area. Well, it also manifested in employment-related fraud, where someone who's present in the country without lawful authority wanted to work and had to present lawful documents in order to do that. And then employers were in a position where you're not trained to be able to recognize fraudulent documents, so if someone is willing to pay enough to get, well, I'll just say documents that are close enough where, unless you're trained in how to detect them, you're going to believe they're good. We had a number of cases then in which the individuals whose identity was taken in order for that person to secure employment ran into problems with means-tested benefits, or in the one instance in which I first became aware of the problem while I was prosecuting at the Mesa office for the county attorney's office, was a woman who was within 6 months of retirement. And so she wrote to the Social Security Administration to get an estimate of her benefits. And they wrote back to her and said, we can't do that. There are 3 employers who are identified as the source of income for you, and we don't know which one to use to identify your contributions to base your benefits off of. And that's how she found out that someone was using her Social Security number to secure employment. So we had those issues within that context. We aggressively worked with law enforcement to prosecute those cases. The overwhelming majority of those cases came to us from law enforcement agencies around the county, not from the sheriff's office, which oftentimes surprises people. But in working through and prosecuting those cases and holding offenders accountable, no more, no less than we would any other offense, today, employment-related fraud is the 3rd most frequent fraud that occurs within the state of Arizona. And the state of Arizona is now 14th in the country when it comes to identity theft. The #1 basis for fraud involving identity theft within the state of Arizona now is government benefits fraud. And so this disproportionately impacts our retired population. In the general scenario in which this happens, is that somebody will gain a Social Security number and an address and a bank account number. And they can go online at that point with the Social Security Administration, and they can redirect where the direct deposit for Social Security benefits is going. And then for the person who's receiving those benefits, if they're not watching their bank account and that bank statement, they may not see the fact that the deposit did not come that month. And they may not see it until the second month. And at that point, they may let it go one more month because they figure it was just an error on the government's side of the equation and that it's going to get fixed. So you could have this occur 2-3 months in a row before someone finally realizes that their account has been compromised. And then they're in a position where they contact the Social Security Administration of trying to prove that they're the account holder and whatever change had been made needs to be unmade and corrected back to what it was previously. And that can be very frustrating for folks to do. Now, other areas of fraud that we still see within Maricopa County, and this is part of street crime that we see, are efforts to try and pass forged checks. We still have instances of people trying to pass counterfeit money. We participated in a task force with the Treasury Department working through the local Secret Service office to address those instances. And then when it comes to retail theft, and I mentioned earlier that I was going to share some anecdotes and the impact of heroin use. What we've seen of late, and it's occurred often enough, or I would say that this is one way in which heroin addiction manifests in criminal conduct, is you'll have someone who will go out and recruit people who are addicted to heroin, actually recruit specific addicts, and then have them go into retail stores and swipe shelves clear of deodorant, shaving cream, toothpaste, or diapers, baby formula, anything that can be readily sold on the side market and then resold from a wholesaler back to corner stores or swap meets for pennies on the dollar. And then the middleman who's purchasing the product, then it's a cash business, they get rich quickly, and then the recruiter also gets rich by then selling the product that the heroin addicts have stolen and then paying the addicts either in heroin or just enough cash for them to get their next fix for that day or maybe the next day so that they come back for more. Now, in that particular instance, the goal of the office is not necessarily to prosecute the addict, because if they truly have that underlying addiction and we can get them the substance abuse treatment, they're not going to participate in that criminal activity. Now, what I want is I want the recruiter and I want the middleman. I want the recruiter because they're basically engaged in a form of a slave trade. And they're preying on people who are addicted and enslaved to a drug. And then I want the middleman who's creating the market for this kind of activity. Now, the impact to retailers, obviously, then, is that they're losing a lot of product. And they're having to make up that cost somewhere. And then, obviously, that's going to get translated through the cost of the goods and then the price to consumers. So the better we are on the public safety end at trying to remedy underlying issues and address and hold the offenders accountable, we can impact the rate at which those crimes are being committed. And then you see that as a business person in being able to secure your own inventory and then the costs that you pay and the prices that you charge, and then we as a broader community benefit from that. Again, if we're wrapping all this up into a really sound economic development discussion and conversation where our crime rates are low, therefore we have good quality of life for people who want to move here, want to set up businesses, or want to relocate businesses here and find a workforce that's more engaged in working and less in committing crimes. Plus, when you look at the overall costs then for insurance, for taxes, for public safety, we've got a positive impact on that. Because let's face it, when it comes to public safety, we're not a revenue generator. We use your taxes. So there has to be a payoff for that where it's benefiting the community. And if we're creating an environment in which public safety is being enhanced, then what I think we should have, again through those economic development discussions, is an environment that encourages businesses to relocate and to grow and to start, which then broadens that tax base, and we can pay for public safety as we go without having an unnecessary pressure on trying to raise taxes and increase that levy or that rate. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time and then throw open to questions on the impact to businesses from the marijuana initiative. And I want to talk about it because I haven't talked about marijuana enough. I've talked more about marijuana the last 5 years than the last 45 combined. But I want to make you aware of this. I'm not going to tell you how to vote. That's not my purpose here today. But I want to cover the specific language in the initiative so you understand it. So I want to help inform you and then encourage you to share information with other business owners and with others in general. There are 3 particular sections within this initiative that, when read together, directly impact businesses. Those 3 separate sections are proposed section 36-2852A1, 36-2852B, and 36-2860A1. Now, I'm going to go through them twice. The first time, I'm going to go through them in the order in which they appear in the initiative. And then I'm going to go back through and read them in the order in which an attorney or a court would consider trying to harmonize those 3 sections to have a coherent view of what is going to happen or what could happen within the workplace when a business owner or a manager responsible for discipline has a scenario in which someone shows up for work impaired by using marijuana. Now, going through it the first time in the order in which these appear. First is 36-2852A1. This chapter, the chapter creating legalized recreational use of marijuana, this chapter does not authorize any person to engage in and does not prevent the imposition of any civil, criminal, or other penalty on a person for inhaling or consuming marijuana or a marijuana product while operating a motor vehicle, train, aircraft, motorboat, or other motorized form of transport or machinery, or while in a passenger compartment that is not isolated from the operator of a motor vehicle, train, aircraft, motorboat, or other motorized form of transport or machinery. And then one more section, actually, 36-2852A7. And I'm going to read it together as it's set forth. This chapter does not authorize any person to engage in and does not prevent the imposition of any civil, criminal, or other penalty on a person for performing any task while impaired by marijuana or a marijuana product that would constitute negligence or professional malpractice. Okay? Then we go to 36-2852B. This chapter does not require an employer to allow or accommodate the possession or consumption of marijuana or marijuana products in the workplace and does not affect the ability of employers to enact and enforce workplace policies restricting the consumption of marijuana and marijuana products by employees. And then we go to 36-2860A1. Notwithstanding any other law except as otherwise provided in this chapter, and it's almost a double negative. So let me say that again. Notwithstanding any other law except as otherwise provided in this chapter, it is lawful in this state and may not be used as the basis for prosecution, penalty, or seizure or forfeiture of assets for a person who is at least 21 years of age to possess, use, purchase, obtain, process, manufacture, or transport marijuana accessories or 1 ounce or less of marijuana, except that not more than 5 grams of marijuana may be in the form of concentrated marijuana. All right, so can you as an employer prohibit someone from possessing marijuana in the workplace? Yes, you can. Can you prohibit someone from using marijuana in the workplace? Yes, you can. What happens when someone shows up, though, having consumed marijuana during a break off of the workplace premises and then shows up impaired? Can you send them home? No, you can't. Well, wait a minute. Why? Because it says this chapter does not require an employer to allow or accommodate the possession or consumption of marijuana or marijuana products in the workplace. Right, possession or consumption. And does not affect the ability of employers to enact and enforce workplace policies restricting the consumption of marijuana and marijuana products by employees. Well, it would seem there that you could have a policy that said you can't use while you're working. But now here's where you've got to go and read the other sections. When you read 36-2860A1, it creates a statutory right to use marijuana. So what happens when you have a conflict there? Well, now let's go look at the other sections, in particular the section that says This chapter does not authorize any person to engage in and does not prevent the imposition of any civil, criminal, or other penalty on a person for. So you could impose a penalty on someone for performing a task while impaired by marijuana or a marijuana product that would constitute negligence or professional malpractice. So if they do something negligent or that amounts to malpractice, then you can do something. But you've got to wait for them to do that. If you have a policy right now that you're not allowed to show up at the work site impaired by alcohol, and you smell alcohol on somebody's breath, you don't have to wait for them to do something negligent. You don't have to wait for them to engage in something that would amount to malpractice. You can take action now. But if someone shows up and they appear to be impaired by marijuana, you have to wait then, because you can impose a penalty, but it's for performing a task while impaired that would constitute negligence. So you can't even do it in a circumstance where it would lead to a negligent act. You have to wait for it to happen. That's a tremendous upheaval of most drug-free workplace ordinances, rules, policies that employers might have. And there's no exception in this initiative if you have federal contracts for you to be able to say, well, as an employer, I have a relationship with the federal government, and this particular product or this particular service that we provide requires me to have a drug-free workplace, so we can't do this. No. This initiative would not allow for you to say that. They can in Colorado, and the same sponsoring organization that wrote this initiative wrote the initiative in Colorado. So the fact that it's not here is rather telling. So I would encourage you to read the initiative in total. I've just shared with you one little snippet there that would affect businesses. And also, hopefully you've seen that when you go through it the first time, if you're a business owner, you're going to see, oh, okay, I can impose a penalty if someone's engaged in negligence or malpractice. You may not notice that the way this is worded, it actually means that that's the only time you can impose a penalty. And then secondly, you would read through and see that, oh, this doesn't require me to allow possession or consumption. It doesn't affect my ability to enforce policies, but yet it does when you have to compare and contrast that to other language later on in the initiative that creates that statutory right to use, and the language in the initiative just refers to the workplace, and it only allows a penalty for negligence or malpractice. So the wording of this is tricky at best. I've read through it probably about 30 times. Each time I read through it, I find something new. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well, and then do what you're going to do on the ballot in November. That concludes my presentation. What questions do you have?
Question. What's the employer's liability if he enforces it, even knowing that perhaps he just doesn't want it to happen or want the people there? Is he liable for any kind of legal action by the employee?
It's a great question, and I think if we look at some of the litigation surrounding the Medical Marijuana Act and litigation in Colorado by employees against employers, we could expect those same questions to arise here in Colorado, or in Arizona. The difference being that the language in the initiative for Arizona is much more permissive and protective of a user than it is in Colorado. So, Colorado may be illustrative, but it's not going to be definitive about how that works out. And what I would argue is that if I have clear language in Arizona law, if this were to pass, that says I have a statutory right to use, and you take adverse action against me, well, then I may very well have a cause of action. And if you're a small business person who doesn't have that big law firm on retainer, that could be very expensive for you. The other thing to consider too is that if it is your policy to drug test candidates for employment and someone comes up positive for THC, the psychoactive component of marijuana, and you decline an offer of employment, they may be entitled to unemployment benefits now because you denied them a job for conduct that is statutorily protected. And there's even more, and I'm just, yes, sir?
Why would our legislators and congressmen pass such a, I don't believe that.
We want to get your questions on tape, so.
Why would I, what?
Recording.
Why legislators, senators write such a sloppy law and put such a sloppy document before the voters, because we're gonna get into that booth, read it, glance at it, think we understand it, and may vote adversely to what we really want. And then provide a, like you said, an action item, I call it a lawsuit, okay, for the individual that is really breaking the law, or it isn't a law yet, but providing an avenue for additional wrongdoing, okay? I mean, it's wrong. They should never have let it onto the ballot with it being so sloppy. I mean, we can take a situation from Colorado and duplicate it, but we didn't do that. We took something from Colorado and we did a half-done job getting it on our ballot. Okay,
But
now, I mean,
So let me address your question, then if you got a follow-up, I'd be happy to take that too. Because the first part of it is, why did the legislature draft it this way and allow it to get onto the ballot like this for us to consider? And I may not have been clear at the beginning. This is actually a citizens' initiative. It was written by the Marijuana Policy Project, which wrote the same initiative in Colorado, and it was placed on the ballot by circulating and collecting over 250,000 signatures. They spent about $1 million to do it. So this never went through our legislature. This does illustrate, though, I'll say the dangers of the citizens initiative process, where if you have an entity that has enough money, they can write a statute supporting any kind of an idea, and depending upon how they present it to registered voters and signing that petition, they can get just about anything on the ballot. I was part of a lawsuit that sought to have this removed from the ballot because the title of this is it's to regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol. And the summary of it only references 5 things about establishing a 15% tax on retail marijuana sales, from which the revenue will be allocated to public health and education. Not so. Actually, the revenue initially goes to pay for the new Department of Marijuana, to pay for the new Marijuana Commission, and then to pay the Department of Revenue for collecting all these taxes. And then it can be distributed among a couple of education sources. And then the second thing the summary states, it allows adults 21 years of age and older to possess and to privately consume and grow limited amounts of marijuana. Well, it says if you're an adult and a resident in a home or an apartment, you can grow up to 6 plants, but plant is not limited. And I have seen plants in size from 3 feet to 6 feet to 8 feet and higher. So that's not a limited amount. Now you're talking about someone who, under the initiative, is allowed to possess 1 ounce, but they can grow and cultivate pounds. The third thing in the summary, it states that it creates a system in which licensed businesses can produce and sell marijuana. Well, not really, because the system that gets set up, it provides exclusive rights to apply for and have issued licenses for retail marijuana sales to current dispensary owners. And the formula for identifying how many licenses are going to be available is almost the exact same number as current dispensary owners. So it's not for all businesses, it's only for dispensary businesses. And then the fourth point establishes a Department of Marijuana Licenses and Control to regulate the cultivation, manufacturing, testing, transportation, and sale of marijuana. Well, it does do that, but unlike how we regulate alcohol, where there are 7 members of a liquor board, the Marijuana Commission also has 7 members, but 3 of those members must be people who are actively involved in the marijuana business. On the liquor board, it can only be 1. And then there's also what I call a businessman's veto within the initiative, that if the rules and ordinances passed make it unreasonably impracticable for someone to run a marijuana business, then those rules can be challenged. And then the 5th area, provide local governments with the authority to regulate and limit marijuana businesses. Well, not so. If you currently have 5 authorized dispensaries in the city of Chandler, you cannot limit them from continuing to operate as a retail marijuana business. And at each location, that business owner, if they reorganize as a marijuana business, can grow, can manufacture, can test, can produce, and can sell marijuana out of that location. You can't restrict it. Even through a citizens initiative or referendum here in the city of Chandler, and I live here now, if we wanted to put something on the ballot that said no more retail sales, we've had enough of this, we could say no more for every new business person coming in. But for those that are already here, you cannot restrict it. And you cannot tell them they're not allowed to operate one of those 5 different types of a retail business. So to your question about, why didn't someone challenge this, we did, and we challenged it on those grounds that the summary was misleading, and even the title is misleading, because we don't treat alcohol like that. The first court denied and dismissed that lawsuit. It's on appeal, but we're continuing to fight that. And then in terms of my position as the county attorney, there are public safety impacts here, and in terms of our lunch hour here, there are significant impacts to businesses that, as you point out, if this had gone through the legislative process, most likely never would have got out of a committee. Certainly not worded this way. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What can you tell us, I imagine the marijuana industry is a pretty cash-intensive business. And being that they're not able to deposit their cash in federally insured financial institutions such as banks and credit unions, what is their underground banking system looking like? Can you answer?
The direct answer is that they remain a cash-only business where they retain the cash on premises unless and until they need to use that cash for a different business purpose. They cannot use the federal banking system because, as the gentleman mentioned earlier, at the federal level, this is still all illegal.
Right.
Every aspect of this is illegal at the federal level. So they cannot take advantage of a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation account to do that.
To piggyback back on that, is it fair to say that they're also not having to meet those same expectations that other people do with regards to reporting large cash transactions and things like that?
Well,
Suspicious activities and things like that?
Correct. They're not required to because they can't be required to. And that's also why the expectation that there would be a lot of tax revenue that would go to education is suspect at best. Because as I mentioned, there are 3 buckets that have to be filled before anything overflows for education. You've got to pay for the Department of Marijuana, which, unlike the Department of Liquor, isn't restricted to just regulating licensed individuals. For example, if you have a liquor license, the Department of Liquor can come investigate you, can fine you, can hold you accountable for violating provisions of the liquor laws, and they have about 60 sworn positions to do that. But the Department of Marijuana in the initiative is given authority not just for those who are licensed, but also authority to investigate any unlicensed person who transfers marijuana for anything of value. How many people in Arizona might do that?
Right.
So we're talking,
These are
yeah,
held accountable to federal regulations, Bank Secrecy Act, things like that.
Right.
Then this is going to open up a whole new can of worms on financial fees.
correct. So saying then that you've got that problem there about reporting. The next bucket is monies that has to go to the Department of Revenue to help make sure that people are reporting their taxes properly in order for the excise tax that's imposed as a result of the initiative to be collected and to be reported. But as you point out accurately, very accurately, there are no independent records external to that business to compare transactions with. So all you've got are the records that are going to be maintained within that business.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
2 actually. The prosecution of identity theft and scams and frauds, it's been a white-collar crime, so it hasn't really been a great deal of, I call them stern punishments. Are we going to be changing that type of a process when it comes to elderly in the military? Because there's been a real rampant, increase in that area. And also, last question, do you think a service that offers protection would be something that someone should consider?
Okay. I'll take the second question first. I use an identity theft protection system. I've been a victim of identity theft 3 times. And the first time was when I went to go buy an engagement ring. So I was not happy. Though it did give me a great cover story to surprise my future bride when I was able to get it worked out. But, what I would say is this. If you are going to be vigilant in reviewing your credit card statements every month, if you are going to be very adept at choosing to use bank cards and credit cards where they're going to notify you of suspicious purchases, if you're going to be vigilant in checking your bank records every month, if you're going to do all those things, then you may not need an identity theft protection service. But if you're like a lot of Americans and you're going about your day doing the things you want to do, then a protection service may be very valuable for you. Particularly if you've been a victim of identity theft in the past and understand the frustration of trying to operate from the standpoint of being presumed responsible before you prove you're not, then identity theft protection service may very well be worth your money. In terms of how we deal with fraud, white-collar crime, elderly abuse and elderly crimes and crimes against those in the military, we take very seriously those crimes where someone's been victimized and their military status is a component of that. I'm a veteran myself. Don't tolerate it. I don't excuse people from criminal conduct because of their veteran status either, but I don't tolerate it when people have been taken advantage of, or their families who are left behind during a deployment. I think that's an aggravating factor for us to consider when we're handling cases. On the elder abuse front, it depends on where the crime happens. If it's for someone who may be a resident of a nursing home or a care facility, a lot of those offenses fall within the jurisdiction of the Attorney General's office. If it falls outside of that, I have the Fraud and Identity Theft Enforcement Bureau that would be responsible for handling those crimes, and we do specific training for how to handle elderly abuse victims or those who are elderly and they've been victimized through fraud. In terms of the white-collar crime, part of the challenge we face as prosecutors is getting courts to understand that just because someone can ultimately be made economically whole, that doesn't mean they haven't been victimized, and that there weren't a lot of other costly measures that had to be taken in order to deal with that kind of threat, or that kind of theft. One of the ways we've sought to try and address that too was a couple years back we worked with the legislature and businesses here within the Valley to create a trade secrets theft law. Before that law, let's say that you're a business person here in town, let's say you've got a customer list with all the pricing information and discounts that you provide and what you can gross and net based on different types of orders, and it's taken you a few years to put that together, and then an employee takes that and goes to a competitor or becomes your competitor. Previously, if you reported that to police and were to say, this employee stole this from me, this is important to my business, law enforcement would have a difficult time even trying to figure out how to investigate that, because generally law enforcement would look at that and say, what is that worth? How much is that list worth? Is it worth $2,000? Is it worth $25,000? Because that changes the type of felony we're going to charge. Well, you're going to tell me as the business owner, it's priceless. This is my entire business. Maybe you're making $200,000 a month in revenue, and you'd say, well, because that's why I have $200,000 a month in revenue. Well, can I get an expert to come into court and say that? Or is someone going to say, well, just take the amount of time it took you to actually create that list, and then what your hourly wage might be, and we'll value it that way. And maybe then it's $1,500 instead of $200,000 in revenue a month. And then as a prosecutor, having a hard time trying to figure out how to translate that and get a jury to understand it put us in a very difficult spot. And oftentimes then what business owners were told was, that's a civil dispute. Go take care of that in small claims court. So we created the Trade Secrets Theft Act, which now says that if there is a peculiar way in which you compile information or work with information, or a peculiar process, and someone takes that, well, now it's automatically a Class 5 felony. It's not a Class 2 felony, which is the highest felony we have in Arizona, but it being a Class 5 means that it cannot be made a misdemeanor automatically. So we keep it at a felony level. And then it doesn't matter what the actual value is of that item. As long as we can prove that it's something you put together in a unique way for your business, that allows us then to move forward with an investigation and a charge. So we're changing how we deal with the idea of white-collar crime overall to address your question directly, to try to address the problem of getting courts to understand the degree to which these crimes hurt business owners, as well as wanting to contribute to an environment in which we encourage entrepreneurs. I mean, you're putting in blood, sweat, tears, and everything else. And to have that taken away from you by an unscrupulous employee can be devastating. And that's not the kind of economy or business environment we want. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, mostly. I had a statement. And the reason I asked is because I was upset with the situation where we had an individual in the state of Arizona that defrauded a lot of folks on their income tax returns, and the total amount of time he spent in prison was 18 months. That's not fair, in my opinion, for those individuals that suffered that. Now they have to prove that they're who they are by carrying a card that they have to provide each time they make a purchase or something of that nature. So I was hoping that perhaps we could get something more stern that would prohibit these folks from even considering that type of theft. That was my main question.
Yeah.
Just lock them up and throw the key away or shoot one.
Yeah. So just a quick side. I didn't think you were being literal. Just as a side note on that, though. So where we have those offenses, though, and people go to prison for it, that becomes part of the population that people define as the nonviolent first offender. And they want to know why we're sending so many nonviolent first offenders to prison. So, and then we have to wind up spending time going through and detailing the demographics of that prison population, get people to understand that where you've got crimes like that, where you get crimes where someone is engaged in a fraud scheme for the first time, but the harm is great and going to prison is still a just punishment, then they get thrown into that other category. So, yes, ma'am.
Hi. I have a rental property, and I engaged in a property manager who I'm no longer using.
That starts to tell me a story.
Right. She has told me that she has filed judgment against previous tenants for the damage that they have done. I asked for proof of that judgment. She says she's engaged an attorney to do that on our behalf, but she will not give me information on the judgment name or the lawyer, and I have not been able to find a judgment in the system to see if it actually was done. So after this, can someone show me how to do research on an issue like this in a small claim? Would that be visible on the system?
Yeah, let me talk to you afterwards, and we can have a private conversation just because I'm not allowed to give legal advice. So.
I just want to learn.
Sure.
How to find it.
Sure. Yes, sir.
I'm a little confused by something you said today that bumps up against something I hear every week. You said that violent crime is at its lowest point in decades, I think.
Yes.
Right? Since the 1960s or something.
40 years. So we go
40
back to
years.
the 70s.
So that's news to me. Every week I hear how illegal immigration leads to a raft of violent crime, and that there's way too much illegal immigration going on, and how can both those things be true at the same time?
So the good lawyerly answer is, well, it depends. And this is, well, this is what I can tell you, is that starting in about 2006, well, starting about 2004, 2005, we saw an explosion in the number of individuals who were being apprehended at the southwest border, and in particular along the Arizona border, coming not just from Mexico, Central America, South America, and in fact, from 2004 to 2008, I can tell you that somebody, at least one person was apprehended from every country on our terror watch list, and one person from every country on our national sponsor of terror list from the nation states. So while that was going on, we then had a huge influx of people who were present within Arizona without lawful authority, along with the cartels who were involved in the drug trafficking and the human trafficking. And so when we talk about it, because I spoke about this 10 years ago. So as a consequence of that environment in which illegal immigration was occurring, we did see a lot of violent crime associated with it. What we didn't see was violent crime then spreading to other sectors of the population or other geographic areas within Maricopa County. So when I shared with you about Phoenix being the kidnapping capital of the world outside of Mexico City, that was concentrated within the Phoenix metro area. We didn't see that also happen in Flagstaff. We didn't see it, explode in Gila Bend. So it was concentrated in the geographic area, it was concentrated in the type of crime that was being committed, and it was concentrated in the individuals who were involved in that sort of crime. So today, when we say that illegal immigration carries with it criminal consequences, it is still a true statement. We had a convenience store clerk who was shot to death by someone who had been convicted by my office for a violent offense, and for evidentiary reasons and witness reasons was put on probation. But if the federal government really was taking every person who had committed a violent offense and deporting them, that person would have been in federal custody and would have gone through immigration deportation proceedings. Instead, the federal government paroled that individual and gave him a court date sometime in the future. And then he went and he killed that store clerk. And I've seen the video, it's horrific. In that instance, what I can say to you is illegal immigration and the failure of the federal immigration system led directly to a violent homicide. So the category of conduct, does that lead to violent crimes and those consequences? Yes, it does. How widespread is that going to be? That depends then on the rate at which people are getting into the community and engaging in additional crimes. What we're seeing in Arizona right now, and it happened after SB 1070 was passed, regardless of your views on that particular piece of legislation, the Statistics Bureau from the Department of Homeland Security under this current federal administration, so this isn't a Republican, Democrat thing, liberal, conservative, under this administration, the Statistics Bureau and the Department of Homeland Security estimates that anywhere from 200 to 300,000 people left Arizona. Even if we were to say that all 300,000 individuals, not one of them committed a crime, but there were people within that population who were victims of crime, that crime then still left, because remember, we measure crime on a per capita basis. So we could say in that circumstance too, that the consequence of illegal immigration and people remaining in the country without lawful authority had a negative impact when it comes to crime. So you can have that conversation and say that. Can you say that illegal immigration is going to directly result in a 10% increase in violent crime? No, you can't draw that conclusion. We don't have the data. But can you say that illegal immigration has had deadly consequences for U.S. citizens and those present in this country with lawful authority? Yes, we've had those circumstances.
But can you also say that illegal immigration is up and crime is down? I mean, that's what doesn't seem to make any sense. You're
Well,
saying illegal immigration is up and crime is down.
You can, if you have sufficient data to say, overall crime is down. If we were to take the consequences of illegal immigration out of it, it might be down another 5%. Might be able to do it. And so what I would tell you then, with just the statistics that I shared with you, thank you for your question earlier. With the statistics that I shared with you earlier, is that if we did have operational control of our southern border, to where the only permissible ways to cross for trade and commerce and tourism was through lawful ports of entry, could we see our murder rate fall below 4.5? Could we actually have the lowest crime rates in the nation? I think we'd easily be in the top 10, maybe the top 5 safest most states based on crime rates. So what I can tell you there is that our crime rates are low, but they could be lower but for crime related to drug trafficking, because that border is unsecure. And because that border is unsecure, I also can track year to year human trafficking and illegal immigration as a result of that by looking at the number of apprehensions. And then I can also compare and contrast that to other states like Texas. So does that help?
I think so.
Okay.
Is part of the answer they're killing each other?
In part, we do see a lot of crimes that occur within minority communities. And this is one of the things that if we're going to have an honest conversation about crime and race and ethnicity in our nation, we need to have an honest conversation about it, because minorities are disproportionately affected by crime in most of the large urban areas. We don't see that as much in Phoenix because, again, we have lower crime rates. But most people who are, when we talk about the prison population and the racial and ethnic makeup of that, the other half of the conversation that's never had is that we have a similar number, at least if not more, victims of crime, of similar racial and ethnic backgrounds. And that's where I get really angry, because no one's speaking for those victims. No one's speaking for the people who have crime perpetrated against them. It makes it hard to have safe neighborhoods, which makes it hard to have businesses come in, which makes it hard to have economic opportunity. And that's sort of like that other half of that ledger that nobody wants to look at. And that makes me very angry. So when we talk about an illegal immigration context and violent crimes there, and I even said this earlier this week when we were talking about the serial shooter in Maryville, and people were concerned if maybe someone who was in the country illegally wouldn't come forward with information because they were afraid of being deported. I don't care. I don't care what your immigration status is. If you've been a victim of a crime or a witness to a crime, you need to report it so that I then can do my job in holding the offender accountable. And then that cuts across the entire swath of racial and ethnic and minority communities. I don't care. My job is to make the public safe for everybody, everywhere they live. We cannot have a balkanization of our community where crime's okay to occur in one area because, you know, it's those folks. Well, I'm sorry, but where I grew up in Southern California, those folks was me folks, and you folks, and us folks. Everybody living in neighborhoods where we were all equally victimized by crime, and it was based on our economic standing. It wasn't based on race or ethnicity. So it's a long way to answer your question, but you gave me a chance to make a few other points. That in order for us to have a strong community, I love Chandler. I lived in Gilbert for 18 years, but I've lived now in Chandler for about 2 months. I love this place. We have a great community. It reminds me so much of where I grew up in terms of diversity and just the makeup of folks and their commitment to the community. You want to have a safe community? Have people who care about each other, and who care about keeping it that way. So you give me a chance to get my soapbox. So, sorry. All right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I think this may need to be the last one so folks can get back to work.
Yeah, I received a letter from Banner Health saying that I could be possibly cyber attackers gained some unauthorized information, and they're offering a monitoring service for free. But what good is a monitoring service? I mean, they'll tell you who have been affected, but they don't really help you. There's other insurances that you can purchase that actually does something beyond just watching your...
Here's what I'll say, and if you want to know the company that I use, I'd be happy to share with you in a private conversation. But for the company that I use, I get an alert whenever the address on my credit reports changes. I get an alert whenever somebody even applies for credit. I get an alert whenever someone has requested my credit report. And so I get a lot of alerts that would give me knowledge that my identity or my credit could be compromised before it even happens. So depending on the protection, it could help you avoid becoming a victim of identity theft in the first place. So, to answer your question? Okay. Folks, I've enjoyed our time together. I'd be happy to stay for another hour, but I'm sure you got a place to go, and so do I. But I want to thank the members of the Chandler Chamber, the work that you do on behalf of our city. And it's been an honor and privilege to have served you as the county attorney. I look forward to continuing to do so and continuing to work with you to make Chandler and Maricopa County the best place in the world to live, work, and raise a family. So thank you.